Christ is risen. Truly he is risen. Alleluia, alleluia, amen. On behalf of all of us here at LifeSite News, I want to wish you, our cherished readers, viewers, and especially our faithful supporters, a most joyful and holy Easter. The strife is o'er, the battle done. Now is the victor's triumph won. Oh, let the song of praise be sung. Alleluia. This is the day that changed everything, the day death was conquered and Christ triumphed over the grave. Imagine the tear-filled joy of the Blessed Mother as she beholds her risen Son, no longer crowned with thorns, but crowned with glory. That same joy is ours today as we recognize that Christ has already won the victory over sin in our lives, in the world, and even within his church. Victory belongs to the Lord. He has triumphed once and for all. And we, as members of his body, are now living out the unfolding of that triumph. This Easter, may that truth be planted deeply in our hearts and never be uprooted. Christus vincit, Christus regnat, Christus imperat. Christ conquers, Christ reigns, and Christ commands. And so, to deepen your Easter meditation, we wanted to share with you a powerful reflection on what may be the most compelling physical relic of the resurrection, the Shroud of Turin, still preserved to this day. This remarkable testimony comes from a physician and scientist who began as a skeptic. But after decades of meticulous study and photographic analysis, Dr. Gilbert Lavoie arrived at a stunning conclusion. The image on the shroud depicts a man not lying down, but rising, lifted up, glorified. Dr. Lavoie came to believe that the shroud is a divinely given image of Christ at the very moment of his resurrection, a sacred sign for our visual age and a call to deeper faith in the risen Lord. We hope this video draws you into a greater awareness and awe of the mystery of Easter and strengthens your faith in Jesus Christ, our victor and our King. From all of us here at LifeSite News, may God bless you and your families this Easter and always. And may Our Lady of Sorrows, now radiant as Queen of Heaven, lead you ever closer to her Son, risen from the dead.
My name is Gilbert Lavoie. I'm a physician, and I have a background of internal medicine, occupational medicine, public health. I have studied the Shroud of Turin for well over 40 years. It's a wonderful experience in delving into trying to understand what this cloth is all about. I have to say that basically I started as a skeptic. When I first came across the book, Dr. Calvary, I was in first year of college, and I was in pre-med. So that's what got me to pick the book up, because I thought it was just going to be a surgeon's assessment of what happened at the crucifixion. But when I opened the book, I found out about the Shroud of Turin, which I never heard about before. And that fascinated me. But after I finished reading the book, I simply put it down and forgot about it. Then I went to, through life, it was about 17, 18 years later. I was in the practice of medicine in Boston, picked up the Boston Globe, and there I saw a photograph of the shroud. And I just wondered, how real this was. I remembered the book that I had read. Went back and found the book, reread the book, and decided that I would go to Turin. It was 1978. They were having the first exposition of the shroud. It was 45 years since the last one. The last one was in 1933. So I went there. I had one contact. I wrote a letter to Father Peter Rinaldi, and then I met him there, and he was most gracious, and he helped me to take photographs of the shroud, to meet with the scientists that were there, and also to go into a conference that was there. That was held at the very end. It was a conference on the medical side of what was going on with the shroud. As time went on, I discovered a blood mark that was an off-image blood mark. No one knew what it was. I think that if I hadn't been a physician, I would have just gone on in my life and not done anything with it. But that blood mark was fascinating me because nobody knew why it was there, and it was an off-image blood mark. So it grabbed my attention, and it took a while for me to figure it out. Finally, I was very fortunate. I had a friend of mine who gave me a full-size copy of the shroud, and I put it over myself, and I saw how the cloth sort of draped around my body, and I came to realize that indeed this blood mark indicated that there was no question that a man that was crucified had been laid out in this cloth and buried. So that was the beginning of my adventure in starting my studies of the shroud. For all of my life, until I started really studying the cloth, I believed that he was laid out. See, the blood marks are consistent with a man who's died in a crucified position. Then he was taken down from that position and laid out in a cloth. And the blood marks are very much consistent with that all through. There's nothing that's not. Almost by accident, I discovered I was doing another study of blood on the hair, blood on the face. Where was it? And I had an individual, my volunteer, lying down to take, because I believed that the man of the shot was lying down. When I got back, my photographs, and in those days we had it wasn't digital era. It was before that, when we had you'd get your film and you'd get your negative film with it. I was very interested in looking at the negative film because I've been learned from the very beginning that we have this magnificent shroud body, but the shroud body is actually a negative, because the first time the shroud was photographed, which was 1898, it's done by Secunda Pia. He discovered that in the negative film, he saw this positive image of a man. And then he couldn't understand why it was a positive face and positive body in a negative. And then he realized what was on the original cloth was a negative, and what was on his negative was a positive of that image. Knowing that, I decided to just say, well, if this is a negative, I'll take the negative I'll look at the negative of my volunteer. It should have some similarity to the negative of the shroud. So I was looking at the negative of the shroud, comparing that with the negative of my volunteer. And I found that it was there was something about it that was so different. In the negative of the man of the shroud, there's light areas around the eyes and the nose and so forth. And on my volunteer, it was just a bland gray. There was none of that. So I was really very upset about that. I said, because again, I was a skeptic, and I said, somebody's pulling my leg. This is not a negative at all. What's going on here? And then I started flipping through the rest of my photographs and the negatives. And then I came across another negative, and it was actually of my same volunteer. And I had accidentally taken his photograph when he was upright. And there were the very same light areas, which were really shadows on his face, as there was on the shroud. So all of a sudden I realized that if that the negatives of the shroud looks like the negative of my upright volunteer, that the shroud image is that of an upright person. It sort of really blew my mind, and it was a really awesome moment, because I never believed, even though there was this phenomenal image in the blood marks, and no one knew how this image was created even today, that I always believed there was really nothing on there that told me that was the moment of the resurrection. However, when I saw this upright man, I was so awed by it. I literally backed out of the room where I saw the shroud, and thinking, my gosh, this is the moment of the resurrection. It was like an epiphany for me. Then I sort of got my composure. I came back in, and I started looking at other things, and then we did studies to see if those shadows were true for the rest of the body, and indeed it was. I said, is there anything else that's consistent with an upright man? And then looking at the hair, I said, my gosh, there it is. Hair is falling down to the shoulders. It's falling down the back as if this person is upright. So gravity plays a major role in telling us that this man is upright. I realized that gravity plays another role with regard to the human body. And if a person is in the upright position, his form is different than if he is sitting or lying down. So we did an experiment, which is just to show people the difference. You have a man who's upright, looking at his backside, because they said Jesus was lying down. We all thought that he was lying down. But when you look at the backside of a man upright, he has form, the back and so forth, the form of his body. You take that same man, which we did, we place him on a large plate of glass, and looking from underneath, looking up. And there's large areas of just smooth areas of the back, the buttocks, and the lower legs. Any kind of black and white photograph, the form comes in when you go from sort of white to gray, or toward a black. And if you have just one flattened area, it would be all just a certain gray color, and it would definitely show. And we don't see that on the shroud. When you look at the back of the man of the shroud, he has the exact form of a man who is upright and not one who is lying on his back. So that was very important too. Since I ever remember, and from whatever I've seen, all sculptures are with Jesus lying on his back. We don't see, no one has really paid much attention to the backside point of view of art or understanding the form of a body lying down. I know that certain artists that are really very good understand that, but when you compare the back of the body, of the real body, to the image of the shroud, you know that he's upright. Once you start to see that the man of the shroud is upright, there's no turning back. There's going to be some people that say they don't want to believe it or whatever. That's fine. I mean, everybody has a right to their own opinion. However, from a objective perspective of looking at gravity and light, we know that he's upright.
For U.S. residents, creating a will has never been easier. Thanks to My Legacy Will, an online platform free of charge, you can now create your own will and choose to include LifeSiteNews in it. Specify where your funeral will take place, the number of masses to be offered for your soul, and how your estate will be distributed. We would be deeply grateful if you remembered LifeSiteNews in your will. Visit mylegacywill.com/LifeSiteNews. Thank you for your support, and may God bless you.
When I saw that he was upright, I realized that his left foot was over his right. And I saw that he's not standing, but he's just as if he's lifted up in midair. And that was very upsetting to me, frankly. I said, if this is the resurrection, why isn't he standing? He seems to be lifted up in midair. So I decided I would start looking at the Bible. And I began by looking at Matthew and Mark and Luke, and I found nothing, with no success. Then I went into John chapter 12, verse 32, and these are the words of Jesus, and I lifted up above the earth, will draw all people to myself. I said, my gosh, that's exactly a description of what I'm looking at. And then underneath that it said, he was talking about his crucifixion. And I said, well, what does all that mean? So I started looking at commentaries and trying to understand what all that meant. And I did come to realize that when Jesus talks about being lifted up in the Gospel of John, we're talking about being lifted up not only in crucifixion, but also in resurrection and ascension to the Father. However, I just said, well, is there anything else? Maybe there's something earlier on in the Gospel that I can find that's related to the upright man of the shroud. And in doing that, I actually took 2 years of graduate studies in a seminary in the Gospels in New Testament, Old Testament. And then I went on to read and study intensely the Gospel of John for about 10 years. And during that time, gradually, I started to understand and see what was really happening. What we call miracles are really what we can call supernatural events, events that are outside of our ordinary understanding of time and space. And so John calls them, actually, we call them miracles. John calls them signs. And Jesus calls them works of the Father, works of God. And those works are very important to Jesus because he explains that if you don't believe who he is, that he was sent by the Father and the Father is in him and he's in the Father, in other words, he's the Son of God, believe me because of the works that I do. So those are something that are very important. And God created those works so that we would realize that there's a being outside of our ordinary understanding of time and space and who loves us and cares for us. So he did those and allowed those things. And in doing so, his apostles, his disciples, they come and they see his glory. And what is glory? Glory is the manifestation of the power and presence of God in the world. And that is what they're showing. And that's a very important concept. So that's why the works of God are out there. Now, God left this work for today. And for some reason, this is the work of the most important event in the history of humanity, of the resurrection of the Son of God. The resurrection tells us who he is. First of all, I've got to tell you a little bit about the cleansing of the temple, because Jesus is in the temple and he is not happy with the fact that there's animals and there's money changers and so forth. And so he goes ahead and starts to cast them out. The Jews in authority are not happy with all of this, what they were seeing. Of course, all my life, I just believed, well, Jesus was interrupting the economy of that temple and making a fuss and whatever and causing all this commotion. But that wasn't it. That's not why they asked him, because the Jews in authority asked him the question, we want to see a sign for why you're doing all this. Show us a sign. They're not asking that because he turned over some money changers. They're asking him that because the first time in chapter 2 of the Gospel of John, for the very first time, Jesus announces that he is the Son of God. And how does he announce that? When he says, stop making my Father's house a marketplace. He is claiming to be the Son of God. And that's where they're upset. And so Jesus gives them a sign. And the sign is, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Now, of course, they thought it was the temple itself. But John makes it very clear he's talking about the temple of his body. And so when you analyze those words, what Jesus is saying, he's describing exactly this. Destroy this temple, destroy my body, and I will raise it up. I will raise that body up. That's what he's saying. That's the sign. And so when you look at the shroud, you see the destroyed body of Jesus raised up. And what Jesus is doing, he is predicting with this sign that he is the Son of God, because that's the question. They don't want to believe he's the Son of God. He shows them the sign that tells him he's the Son of God, and that's what we see in the shroud. So that's where we are, and that's what I believe God did this so that the world today, especially with video and with all the ways we can see this, has allowed this to take place. So the world will know that Jesus 2,000 years ago predicted that he has a sign for the world to know that he is the Son of God. And the lifted man of the shroud is that sign. Without the upright, knowing of the upright man, would have never discovered the fact that John is actually talking about it. And he had to keep it a secret, by the way, because if he didn't, anything with hand or foot upon an object like that would have been considered an object of idolatry, and it would have been destroyed by his own countrymen. So there was no way that he could tell you there's an image there. So that's why he ingeniously concealed this within 3 stories of his gospel. And of course, all that information is in my book, The Shroud of Jesus. and the sign John ingeniously concealed, which he did. It's a fascinating, so almost like a detective story. You go through it. Now, became very interested in the upright man, and I thought that it would be wonderful to do a sculpture of this man. And over a 7-year period, I first began working with an artist. And then I went to a sculptor, Pablo Eduardo. And Pablo Eduardo is a master of art anatomy. And I showed him my work. And I said, if you see what I see, we can work. And he called me back and he said, I see what you see, and I want to do this. So we ended up spending about on and off for about 3.5 years working on the sculpture. We spent probably 2 years, we're just working on the face. And what we did is we did measurement after measurement, looking at blood marks, looking at image marks and so forth to really reconstruct a 3-dimensional image of the man of the shroud. I'd like to say it's perfect, but I can see there's a few places where it's just not perfect, but it's very, very close. And it's very difficult to do. You don't realize it until you're in the process of doing it. When you're doing the face, it's a matter of a millimeter here and there, and you can change the face. It's really quite a challenge. And of course, Pablo is the one, he's the artist. I was just there with him, helping him and discussing it and so forth, because we basically worked together for on and off for those period of time. So the only artistic thing that we did is actually put a loincloth on him, because he was naked on the shroud. And we did also, we placed underneath an artistic piece that looked like the shroud falling. But those are just 2 artistic things. The rest of it is all work to try to really repeat what we see, to bring out the life and bring that image and show that he's, of course, lifted up, and which he is. And when I first started, I said, this is going to not look very good. But it turned out it's actually it's beautiful. So we've been very fortunate to show our work and the sculpture at the St. John Paul II National Shrine in Washington, D.C. The people that I originally presented to were most gracious, and once they saw the work that we had done, they were very interested in having us participate in what they were doing. The shrine is really presenting the shroud in 2 parts. And the first part, of course, is the wonderful pastoral that St. John Paul II presented in Turin, Italy. It's a magnificent pastoral, and it gives you a wonderful spiritual perspective of what we see here on the shroud. And it's really a privilege to be able to participate in that sense with St. John Paul II, and having the work that we have participate there as a part 2 of the exhibit. And everyone was so gracious, and we have over 40 panels on the shroud, and we also have the full sculpture that we just talked about of the man of the shroud. And it's really a blessing to have had this opportunity to be here at this wonderful shrine. But